Hello and welcome to JPD Weekly. So this is part 3 in a very loose series that we're doing on the Essenes, the Qumran community, Dead Sea Scrolls, prophecy, the roots of the Christian faith, and especially in light of end times prophecy that I believe that we're living in. Now, I say loose series because you don't have to have watched the other episodes to understand this episode. I usually don't like doing series because of exactly that. You know, anytime I see part 2 or part 3 of something, I won't watch it because I think that I have to dedicate time to watch the first part and the entire series all together. You don't have to do that with this series. So if you're joining us for the first time, that's totally fine. Just keep watching. You're going to learn some interesting things. But if you do want the whole series, you can get the entire thing at dailyrenegade.com. And it's a subscription service. It's sort of like the Netflix of fringe Christianity, you know, of things that are truly Christian, truly biblical, but you don't typically hear in a lot of churches today because, let's face it, a lot of churches are more worried about donations and congregation size than they are true biblical teaching. So we don't shy away from those things. But we also maintain that we stay doctrinal, stay theologically correct, to make sure that we're not going so far in left field that we're teaching you untruths. We don't want to do that. We don't want to sensationalize. We just want the truths that the Bible has to offer. So this series, we are dealing with the conditions that led to the New Testament. What happened between the Testaments, the Old and New, to create the situation where you have Pharisees and Sadducees, and Israel is all different. That Rome is there, but also what about this mysterious group called the Essenes, who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, or who at least kept the Dead Sea Scrolls? Who are the sons of Zadok? And did they actually have prophecies for our day today? We maintain that yes, they did, and there's some very important things that we can learn from their writings. So we are getting into all that in this 5-part series. This is part 3, but again, you can get the whole thing at dailyrenegade.com, not just the free first half previews that you see here on YouTube, but you'll get the whole thing. And we do that because YouTube deletes our videos frequently. They've even deleted an entire channel. 8 years of hard work gone. So we had to develop something where we could back up our work, but also give you access to everything we have available without us having to be worried about, you know, what we say. Because on YouTube, the rules are getting so crazy, nobody can predict them. Nobody knows what videos are going to get deleted and what aren't. You can just mention Israel and get a video deleted these days. So we want the freedom to be able to say whatever we want so we can teach you guys truth, and we don't have to have the shackles of social media around our wrists. So we do that at dailyrenegade.com. Again, there is a free 7-day trial that you can get right now. So no obligation. Try it out before you get it. If you do like it after your 7 days are up, then you can pay month by month if you want. It's only $10 a month, or the better deal is to do $100 a year, because then you get 2 months for free and you just pay for it once. You don't have to think about it again. So all of that at dailyrenegade.com. You will also find some excellent resources there available to you. There's a free episode of the Sharpening Report that has to do with how we as Christians can escape. We can get away from this beast financial system that runs the world. We actually don't have to have any part in that. We don't have to do global banking. We don't have to be involved in any of the globalism or any of the financial systems that the world has to provide. We as Christians have built our own thing. There is a Christian company, and they are Christian first. They are very much part of this family. They are Christian first above all else. Called Cornerstone, that will show you how you can invest your assets into silver and precious metals and things. So if you want more information on that, head on over to dailyrenegade.com. That is available to everybody. It's not only members. If you're not a member, you can have access to that as well. There's links in the description below if you want more information on that. But I believe in this so much that everybody has access to it, and it's a very good thing. So go check that out. We as Christians have built something for ourselves, so we don't have to take part in the satanic financial system that exists in our world today. Okay, so where we left off, we talked about the conditions that led to the split between Pharisees, Sadducees, and the sons of Zadok, or the priestly line of Zadok, or the Zadokites, or the Essenes. We talked about how most likely the situation between the Qumran community and Essenes is sort of like that of the Catholic Church, not in theology, but just in structure. How with the Catholic Church, you have the Vatican, you have the leadership at the Vatican, but then you have Catholics dispersed all around the world that follow the leadership of the Vatican. It's sort of like, I believe it's sort of like that with the Essenes and the Qumran community. Now, again, that's not in theology. Theology is totally different. Qumran community theology, Dead Sea Scroll theology, is more like Christianity than anything else. But just more in structure of the leadership. So you have the priests in the Qumran community that would teach the doctrines of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then Essenes throughout Israel, just general population Jews that followed that line of theology. Those would be called the Essenes, and they followed the Qumran community. We think that's how it was set up. That seems to be what makes the most sense. So where we left off last time, we were talking about some of the things that originally caused the group that would become the Qumran community to break off from the original Jews, the original group, the original nation, the original body of believers in Israel. So there were divisions, Pharisees broke off, and then you had a large group. That larger group split off between Sadducees and then what would become the Qumran community for various reasons. We looked at some of those reasons before in the previous two episodes. We're going to look at some more today. And all of this leads to the creation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the library at Qumran, and how some of those actually include prophetic texts that's not included in our Bible, but the Essenes were known for having extremely accurate prophecy. So they were right about all of the things that they predicted about the first coming of Christ. So wouldn't it make sense that they would be correct in the things that they predict concerning the second coming of Christ? So that kind of is a brief review of what we've already talked about. So where we're going to pick up today is where we left off before, on how what are some of the reasons that caused this group to split off and go to Qumran. So we already talked about some of the doctrinal issues. And we talked about how they used the different calendar. The would-be Qumran community wanted to stick with the original solar calendar because that was how they knew when to do all their rituals and when to do all their sacrifices and festivals and all of that stuff. Whereas the Pharisees and Sadducees in Israel, the leadership, wanted to side with the pagans and use a lunar calendar. And we even saw how that led to there being over 300 high priests during that time because they all kept dying because they were doing the rituals on the wrong days. And that is expressly forbidden in the Bible. There were priests that lost their lives if they didn't do things on exactly the right day where God commanded. So that's kind of where we left off, but there were other things. It wasn't just the calendar, and we will get more into the calendar in a future episode. We'll get more into that probably next time. But it wasn't just that. There was also acceptance of something called the oral Torah and with the Pharisees, and then the Testament of the patriarchs for the Zadokites. And we talked about how Zadokites, sons of Zadok, Qumran community, those are all kind of talking about the same thing. Those are all terms for the spiritual kind of leadership of that doctrine, of that theology, whereas Essenes are spread around all over Israel, and anybody that follows that are Essenes. Just like the Vatican, the leadership of the Catholic faith at the Vatican, they're Catholic, technically, they are Catholics, but you would call them, Vatican leadership or priests. You'd have a different name for them, whereas just the general Catholics you would just call Catholics. So it's sort of the same thing. Another way to say it, all priests in the Essene theology would be Essenes, but not all Essenes would be priests or Zadokites. So that might be a better way to look at it. So hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, you can go back and watch the other two episodes. We got more into depth about that. Okay. Let's pick up right where we left off. So along with their refusal to accept the lunar calendar and the oral Torah as authoritative and on a higher level than just a simple commentary, the soon-to-be Qumran community claimed to have in their possession the testaments of the patriarchs, which was said to be the last will and testaments of every patriarch from Adam to Aaron, and fragments of those have actually been discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, generally speaking, the Qumran community would say that the oral Torah is completely fabricated, and the oral Torah, again, it was this collection that the Pharisees said that interpreted the Torah, but they never wrote it down. They actually didn't write it down until after the destruction in 70 AD of the temple, and then that became the Talmud. So this was like the pre-written Talmud. And the Qumran community, the Zadokites, completely rejected that. They said that the oral Torah was completely made up. It was fabricated. Now, the Pharisees would have said that the testaments of the patriarchs that they used to exist, but that they were lost throughout time, and the documents that the Qumran community claimed were the testaments were actually fabricated. So there's this kind of dichotomy between these two claims. And we see this back and forth detailed in the Talmud and in the Dead Sea Scrolls both. But of course, they each have their own leanings. Now, much how we Christians today will use the New Testament to help us make sense out of some things in the Old Testament, those who believed in oral Torah would use that to help interpret the books of the Old Testament or the Torah, while those who sided with the Qumran community would have used the testaments of the patriarchs. Now, it's important to note as well that while the Pharisees would have elevated oral Torah to the level of Scripture, the Qumran community apparently did not believe that the testaments of the patriarchs or any of the other Dead Sea Scrolls should be added to what was already recognized as canon. Today what we would call the Old Testament. They didn't call it that, but they did have, a canon. They did have a set of books that was the canon, and then they had other extra things. So this was a large part of the issue. If the Pharisees had considered the oral Torah as just commentary, it probably wouldn't have been as much of an issue for what would be the Qumran community, because the Dead Sea Scrolls are full of commentaries on Old Testament books and passages. However, since the Pharisees elevated the oral Torah to such a degree that it was required to be followed in the same way as the Torah itself, that created an eventual split between the Pharisees and the group that would become the Qumran community. Now, after weighing out both sides of that conundrum today, we would only have to ask ourselves, one would only have to ask himself, who would I believe? Now, if you're interested in my personal opinion, for me personally, it seems too convenient that the Pharisees would have always kept this oral Torah thing from the time of Moses, but never wrote it down until after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, especially when first mention of it comes at a really convenient time in history for the Pharisees. It just seems too convenient at that time in history where they would say, oh, well, actually, it turns out we have this oral Torah thing and we've always had it, but we have it. And so now you all have to listen to what we say and do what we say, and you have to follow what we say just as much as you would follow the Torah itself. It just seems too convenient that right while they were trying to get power over the rest of the population, all of a sudden they have this oral Torah thing. That seems a little too coincidental, a little too convenient for me. It also seems too convenient that those who originally kept and wrote and kept the Dead Sea Scrolls, or their descendants, would have somehow lost all of the testaments of the patriarchs. Because again, that's what the Pharisees claimed. They claimed that they lost the testaments of the patriarchs, and what the Qumran community had and what we're calling testaments of the patriarchs were made up. That seems too convenient to me. Think about it. The testaments of the patriarchs would have been regarded as incredibly important. Again, these would have contained the writings of Adam himself. So when it's obvious, it's also obvious that they knew how to keep copies of documents for extended periods of time. It's literally what they are known for in our modern day, because we have access to the Dead Sea Scrolls because they were so good at this. So it seems unlikely that if they actually lost them, For one thing, it seems unlikely that they lost them at all. I mean, this wasn't just some random letter from from your grandpa or something that you might put in a shoebox and forget about after a couple of years. I mean, this was like literally the last will and testaments of the first human beings, on earth and their descendants leading up to Moses. This would have been so important to them. How on earth could they have lost it when clearly they were not careless about their ancient documents? They kept extremely good care of them. They took very good care of them. So it seems unlikely that they lost them at all. But even if they did lose them, even if they actually lost the testaments of the patriarchs, it also seems unlikely that they would have completely invented new ones and then passed them off as originals, lied like that. Especially when honor, honesty, and abstaining from wickedness was so important throughout their community. It seems unlikely that they would have lied about that. So from the way that and especially because there would be nothing to gain, but from the way that I personally understand it, the Qumran community did not have an incentive to lie, but the Pharisees certainly did. Now, added on to this is the reputation of the Essenes throughout the ancient writings that we already looked at earlier in previous episodes. That these are coming from historians that were not Essene themselves. And they were saying that the Essenes were regarded. I mean, they had this very high opinion of them. They had an excellent reputation. So the reputation of the Essenes throughout the ancient writings that we looked at earlier, compared against the reputation of the Pharisees throughout the Gospels. The Pharisees don't have as high of a reputation as the Essenes did. So, of course, that does not mean that every Pharisee was pure evil and every member of the Qumran community was benevolent beyond reproach, nor does it mean that we can say any of this for absolute sure, as we are half a world and 2,000 years removed from this location and time period in human history. But based on the evidence that we have available to us today, personally, I feel comfortable in my own educated guess that most likely the Qumran community were being forthright and honest, and the Pharisees were being completely dishonest. However, again, this is a situation where everyone should look at the available evidence for themselves and come to their own conclusions. It's part of why I'm writing a book on this topic. And again, hopefully that'll be available later this year. Now, this leads to how Rome actually came to rule Israel. This leads us to understanding the conditions of Israel when we arrive at the New Testament, specifically with the reason for Rome's occupation. So, after the Jewish queen, Salome Alexandra, died in 67 BC, her sons, Hyrcanus II, who Salome Alexandra installed as high priest, and Aristobulus, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but so those two sons started a civil war, which greatly devastated Judea. So by 63 BC, there had been constant strife within Israel between the Pharisees, who sided with Hyrcanus, and the Sadducees, who sided with Aristobulus. I don't know. It's a hard name to say. Now, during Passover of that year, 63 BC, Hyrcanus had the Sadducees at the temple attacked. He had them attacked, causing Aristobulus to reach out to a representative of Roman General Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey. General Pompey. Now, at first, Aristobulus was able to gain favor with Pompey, but eventually Pompey sided with Hyrcanus and had Aristobulus arrested. And I think that's the last we'll have to try to pronounce that name, so I think he's out of the picture now. Okay, so good. He was arrested. Now, the Pharisees allowed Pompey to come into Jerusalem. However, the Sadducees were still occupying the temple. So Pompey attacked and was able to take control of the temple. Pompey returned to Rome as the most influential politician of his age, and large parts of Israel were annexed by the Romans. So Judea and Galilee became a client kingdom of Rome at that time because of all that. Now, in 49 BC, civil war broke out in the Roman Empire, and Julius Caesar defeated Pompey. Hyrcanus and an individual named Antipater cooperated with Caesar, and Antipater appointed his son Herod, which should be a familiar name, appointed his son Herod as governor of Galilee. Now, in 43 BC, the nephew of Hyrcanus tried to take the throne, but Herod defeated him and married Hyrcanus's daughter, which put him in line for the throne. Now, by the time Herod became king of Judea, the Jews of all belief systems, so Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes, came to hate him. They hated this guy. They despised his transgressions of the Mosaic law, his Greek style of his various building projects throughout Israel, and the fact that he was clearly a Roman king rather than a Jewish one. So they absolutely hated all of that, which caused some strife in Israel for the time. Now, there was actually an Essene prophecy for Herod the Great. And this is a fascinating story, but we are going to talk about that in the members only section. So that leads us up to the time of Herod, and we are getting really close to the time of the New Testament. And then in the following episodes, we're going to talk more about the Dead Sea Scroll calendar and the prophetic implications that it has for us today. But that's some more of the backstory that leads us up to Herod, and there is an Essene prophecy for Herod the Great that is absolutely fascinating that we have to talk about. But again, we're going to do that in the members only section. So head on over to, if you're not a member yet, head on over to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership. You can get a free trial right now for 7 days. And after the 7 days, if you like it, which I have no doubt that you will, if you like what we have to offer, then you can get a membership for month to month. You can do it for $10 a month or $100 a year. By the way, if you already have decided you want to support this ministry, you don't have to do the 7-day trial. You can just sign up for a membership. So you have that choice available to you. But it helps this ministry, and we got a lot of cool things coming, and we have lots of episodes. So you'll get the rest of this episode. You'll get this whole series, this whole 5-part series on the Essenes and prophecy and the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that stuff. You'll get this entire series available to you at dailyrenegade.com. So make sure you head on over there, get a membership if you don't have one already. If you do have a membership, members, hang on the line. Everybody else, thank you so much for joining us. Love you all. Till next time, take care and God bless.